So a rumor was posted earlier today that at Anime Expo this year, they're going to be announcing a remake of Trigun. Now, I'm not one to ever want to make videos about baseless speculations, theories, or rumors. That is not content that I enjoy, and I think it is just kind of clickbaiting off of lies and is not something that I particularly enjoy or value. But regardless of whether or not this ends up being true or not, I did want to talk about this idea of remaking Trigun. As you guys know, I'm working on the Yasuhiro Nightow I retrospective, and the Trigun video was supposed to have been done by now, actually, but I'm still working through those copyright issues with making video essays about anime, so I wanted to make sure that the Trigun video was going to be okay when I finally made it. But obviously, I am a huge fan of Yasuhiro Nightow, and I had one of those moments where I feel like thinking about the thing sort of willed it into existence, which is crazy. Not that I believe that's actually true, but it's a remarkable coincidence that I was just thinking about this very thing, this very idea of remaking Trigun recently, and I was just having one of those like deep shower thoughts moments where I was like, you know what if? And I was thinking about my script for the Trigun video and how I've gone through all these old interviews with Yasuhiro Nightow and talked about his creative vision, the process of making the manga and the anime adaptation and all that. And I thought about, people will probably insist that they remake it, or there's going to be some people that value accuracy to the manga overall else, but that's a complicated point because the Trigun anime as it is already great. It's already nearly flawless. And so just because it ends up being more accurate to the manga doesn't make it better. But I think if they were to remake it, you might end up with one of those Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood type scenarios where maybe the new work will kind of supersede the old work in terms of popularity due to its manga accuracy. But the problem I have with the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood argument is that both the original series and Brotherhood are both fantastic. And people oftentimes undersell just how good the original is because it has that remake, which does take things in a very different direction. And then you have things like Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate, where I personally don't feel like the original Hellsing holds up very well at all. And I feel like Ultimate was very necessary to make that story complete and feel right. And honestly, just be good at all. I didn't find the original Hellsing to be that good as it was, and it really needed Ultimate to really make it what it was. And then you have, of course, the Fate Stay Night adaptations. You have the Dean anime, which focuses on the Fate route, but is often accused of trying to add too many different elements from different routes into the main story of the Fate route, which I think actually works well for that anime, because if you actually watch it, unlike what most people do, you will realize that it doesn't actually combine as many elements from the other routes as people think it does, and the ones that it does include do kind of tidy things up a little bit. But the Unlimited Blade Works Ufotable anime is much more highly regarded, because you could almost make that argument that it is the equivalent of a manga accurate Fate Stay Night, because the manga we did get for Fate Stay Night was the Unlimited Blade Works route, and of course now they're making another Unlimited Blade Works manga on top of that to make things even more confusing. But regardless, I think that people are quick to jump to the conclusion of if it's accurate to the manga, it must be good. That's not necessarily the case. It all depends on the story, and I think in various different cases, there are certain stories that are better told in certain forms of media. Berserk is a great example of one that is always told better in the manga. And so, regardless of the fact that there are two really good adaptations of the Golden Age arc, those are more so just a pipeline of accessibility to get you interested in the manga. Like, if you enjoy the Golden Age, the 1997 Berserk anime and the Golden Age movie trilogy enough, and you want to get into the rest of the story, there's that accessibility pipeline into the manga where you'll enjoy the optimal way to enjoy that story. Whereas something like, in fact, I'll say Trigun. I feel like Trigun is better as an anime. I don't think that it being in a manga form is inherently a better way to tell that story. And I think that the short and tight consistency of the anime really lends itself to a certain degree of intimacy with the characters. And I don't feel like it really departs from Yasuhiro Nightow's vision very much at all. But Nightow was asked at Anime Expo a decade ago, when the movie was coming out, when Trigun Badlands Rumble was coming out. He was asked at his Anime Expo interview if he would be interested in Trigun getting rebooted. And the interesting thing about that is that Trigun was not the runaway hit in Japan that it was in the US. Trigun is very Western, literally in terms of its themes, in terms of its style. And so naturally it had more Western appeal than it did in Japan, even as sort of an oddity or an intentionally foreign aesthetic to Japan. That didn't resonate as well as he thought it would. So the American fan base, and Nightow has gone on record to say the American fan base is largely responsible for Trigun continuing to exist, and the fact that we have the movie at all was based on the Western fan base, and the fact that there is a loyal following for this series in the West that really, really loved it and really put it on a pedestal as one of the classics, one of the cornerstones of Western anime, where, if you talk about your favorite series, inevitably you're going to end up talking about like the Toonami and Adult Swim era, and Trigun is one of those series that's inevitably going to come up. The other thing as well is the original publishing of the manga was very troubled, because the original shonen serial that he was publishing it in got canceled. And so it was through a stroke of luck, and I guess the market just happened to be right at the time, that he was able to get another publishing deal and sort of reboot the manga as an independently published manga, as opposed to being part of a serial shonen. And it's my personal belief that serialized stories are usually inferior to an overarching story. And that sort of comes back to the accessibility of the media as well. People often put Trigun and Cowboy Bebop together as similar anime from the same era. People favor Bebop a little bit more most of the time, but they are an interesting dichotomy, because Bebop is serial and episodic, and Trigun is an overarching story. And most of the time, like I said, I think the overarching story works better, and I think there's sort of a push away from serialized episode of the day, story of the day kind of stories with a lot of media these days, because of things like Netflix and even the anime streaming services debuting an entire season of a show at a time. So they're less inclined to... They're more inclined to release an entire season and have an overarching story that somebody can binge in a day. And that is considered a digestible chunk for that intended audience. So, but regardless, my point in bringing that up is that Trigun's origins, the manga's origins, were as a serial story. And it was through the publication of the reboot that he got that allowed him to make it an overarching story and actually have it be a story with a purpose. And I think that's really where Trigun found its mark and where it found its success. Inevitably, this new anime, if they do make it, is going to follow the manga and inevitably be an overarching story. It's not like it's going to be episodic or non-linear. And it will be cool to see the later arcs of the story be animated. One thing that I think the biggest thing I'd be concerned about with a remake of Trigun is which animation studio are you going to give it to? Not just because the series we think of in our head is inherently 90s and has a sort of crude hand-drawn style to it, and it is in a smaller aspect ratio. But there's something about specifically Nightow's art style that is profound. And it's the main reason of why I want to do the Nightow retrospective. You can't make it look like Blood Blockade, because Blood Blockade is a very different style of its own, even though it is also Nightow. And you could make it look like the sort of pseudo 3D CG that like Gungrave Overdose has, but even that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for Trigun. I think the biggest comparison I can think of is something like Megalobox or whatever it's called, where they actually intentionally made that series look older by deliberately putting it in a smaller aspect ratio, a smaller resolution than modern anime is typically done in. And like they use some techniques deliberately to make it look retro. I don't think the new Trigun necessarily has to do that, but it does have to, at least in the art style, have a very gritty, heavy lines, lots of dark shadows and shading to really make the harsh edges of Nightow's art style really pop. And so if it looks something like Jujutsu Kaisen or the new Chainsaw Man anime that's coming out, I think that will be a good look for it. But don't give it to a shitty animation studio, and don't make it too bright and colorful, because that's not what this series is about. So that's about all my thoughts about that. Gave away some of the things I plan on talking about in the main Trigun video for the Nightow retrospective. And if you guys are looking forward to seeing those videos, definitely let me know, because I sure am looking forward to making them. Again, it's going to be a video about Trigun, a video about Gungrave, then the Gungrave anime, then Gungrave Overdose, then the Trigun movie, then Blood Blockade, and then we'll talk about Gungrave VR. And it's funny, as of the time of making this, that Gungrave Gore is still not out. It's been like canceled and rebooted like 3 times now, and there's no telling when it will actually release. But I'm looking forward to it when it does. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.